Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're jumping straight into a really critical moment that happened right after Lexington and Concord, April 19th, 1775, the Battle of Meriam's Corner.
Right. It's kind of sandwiched between the famous first shots and the mean retreat, but it's super significant.
Exactly. And you sent us some really interesting source material specifically on this skirmish. So our mission today is to unpack what happened there, why it was important, and what these sources really tell us about that early revolutionary period.
Sounds good. And the info you shared, it really helps frame this. It wasn't just a random fight. It grew out of all that tension brewing for years.
Yeah, you had the British taxes, the import duties.
And the big sticking point.
Mm-hmm.
No colonial representation in Parliament.
Yeah.
No taxation without representation.
Right.
That whole thing.
That's bound to cause trouble, and then things escalate with the Boston Tea Party.
Big time. And Britain's response. General Gage and about 4,000 troops occupy Boston. Plus, Parliament basically gives Gage the green light to dissolve the Massachusetts Bay government.
Wow. So imagine being John Hancock or Samuel Adams leading that government, and suddenly London says, nope, you're done. That must have felt like a real punch to the gut.
Oh, absolutely. A
Yeah.
direct attack on their self-governance. But the colonists didn't just, roll over.
No, they formed their own Massachusetts Provincial Congress.
Exactly.
Mhm.
And started organizing local militias, gathering weapons, supplies. You can see the shift from political protest to, well, preparing for something more.
Wasn't there the Boston Port Act, too, closing the harbor?
Yeah, that was huge.
Yeah.
Massive unemployment, widespread discontent. It just added fuel to the fire, really. A real pressure cooker environment in Boston.
Okay, so that's the backdrop. Then April 19th, British troops marched to Concord to grab those militia supplies. They hit resistance in Lexington, then more at Concord's North Bridge.
Where they actually got pushed back, took significant casualties in the bridge. That's when Lieutenant Colonel Smith, the British commander, decides, okay, time to get back to Boston.
And it's during that retreat that Meriam's Corner happens?
Precisely. So our goal here is to really zoom in on that moment. What exactly went down at that crossroads? Why was it more than just another skirmish along the road? And what can we learn from the sources about this, opening phase of the war?
All right, let's set the scene. It's around noon, April 19th. You've got about 700 British regulars starting that long march back from Concord.
Yeah, and Lieutenant Colonel Smith, he's obviously worried. The sources suggest he knew there could be up to 1,000 colonial militia potentially out there.
So naturally, he takes precautions, deploys flankers along a ridge running beside the road. Standard procedure, right? Protect the main column.
Exactly. Trying to prevent ambushes from the sides. But here's the key topographical detail from the sources. That ridge ends near Meriam's Corner.
And Meriam's Corner isn't just a crossroads. It's where the road has to cross a bridge over Elm Brook.
Uh-huh. A tributary of Millbrook. So the terrain itself is about to become a major factor.
Because that bridge, it's narrow. The sources emphasize this.
Right. So those flankers, who are spread out on the ridge, they have to funnel back into the main column to cross. They can't maintain that protective screen.
And the formation gets squeezed down.
Yeah, the source mentions down to just 3 soldiers wide to cross that bridge. So for that moment crossing the brook, they're bunched up and, crucially, without flank protection, temporarily exposed.
That sounds like a tactical nightmare waiting to happen. Even a small feature like a bridge suddenly becomes critical.
It really does. And just as the British are dealing with this bottleneck,
New militia companies start showing up at Meriam's Corner. Men from Reading, Chelmsford, Billerica, they're converging on this exact spot.
they are. And they're not just standing around. They immediately use the available cover, the Meriam family's houses, barns.
Ah, like in that postcard image you sent. It shows the Nathan Meriam house, helps you visualize where they were hiding.
Yeah, it gives you a real sense of the place. They're using the farm buildings for cover, waiting.
And the sources highlight the Reading Minutemen arriving first, right?
Yep.
Led by a Captain John Brooks.
That's him. And he's an interesting figure, the material notes. He goes on to become a general and even governor of Massachusetts later. So clearly a capable leader even then.
And his company got there ahead of their main regiment.
Seems so. They move fast. And what they see is the British light infantry coming down off that ridge, Meriam Hill, pulling back towards the road to cross the bridge.
Right when they have to abandon their flanking position.
Exactly. Brooks and his men spot this vulnerability. The British rearguard is approaching the bridge. The flankers are rejoining the main column. It's the perfect moment.
A tactical opportunity served up by the terrain and the timing.
Absolutely. And Captain Brooks sees it. He gives the order. His Reading men open fire on that concentrated, exposed British column right at the bridge.
Imagine the shock for the British. They're just trying to cross a stream, and suddenly, close-range fear erupts from behind the buildings.
Well, the British rearguard reacts immediately. As the last of their troops get over the bridge, they wheel around and fire back a volley towards the militia.
But how effective was the militia fire now compared to earlier? The source mentioned it was kind of ineffective at Lexington.
That's a key point. Earlier, it was often long range, maybe disorganized, but here, at Meriam's corner, they're firing from behind cover, at close musket range. Much deadlier.
And the results reflect that.
They do. The source is specific. The militia fire kills 2 British regulars and wounds possibly 6 more. And critically, no Colonial casualties reported in this specific exchange.
Wow, that's a definite win for the militia there. A clean exchange, really.
It is. It shows how effective they could be when they had the advantage of surprise and terrain. And it seems Smith learned his lesson. The source says he redeployed flankers as soon as they were past the bridge. He wasn't going to get caught like that again if he could help it.
But the fighting wasn't done for the day, not by a long shot, about a mile further down the road.
Near a place called Brooks Hill, or sometimes Hardy's Hill.
Right. Another large group of militia had gathered there. The source estimates maybe 500 men.
Yeah, positioned on a hill south of the road. Another potentially advantageous spot, looking down on the retreating column. The colonists were really starting to use the landscape now.
So Smith sees this gathering threat on the hill. What does he do?
He can't just ignore them. His leading troops launch an assault, charging up the hill to try and clear the militia out, prevent another damaging attack.
Must have been intense fighting. Did the militia break and run?
That's what's significant here. According to the source, they didn't. They stood their ground on Brooks Hill and apparently inflicted significant casualties on the British forces charging up at them.
So a growing confidence, a willingness to engage directly, even against a charge.
Seems like it. It's a definite shift from just harassing fire to standing and fighting. A tougher resistance than perhaps the British expected on this retreat.
Okay, let's circle back specifically to Meriam's corner itself then. The takeaway casualties. 0 Patriots, 2 British killed, maybe 6 wounded.
Correct. For that specific fight at the bridge, it was a clear Patriot success.
And while it's a small fight in the grand scheme, putting it in the context of the whole retreat,
It shows the resistance wasn't just sporadic anymore. It was becoming more organized, more effective. The militias were learning, adapting, using the terrain. Miriam's Corner is a prime example of that shift happening in real time.
Okay, so for everyone listening, let's crystallize the key takeaways from this deep dive into Meriam's Corner. First, it really hammers home how quickly those colonial militias could mobilize. Word gets out, and bam, they're converging on the route.
Absolutely. Speed and local knowledge were huge advantages. And second, it shows their growing willingness not just to protest, but to actually fight, to engage the king's troops directly.
And the terrain, specifically that bridge, forced the British into a weak spot.
Exactly. It highlighted their vulnerability when constricted and denied their usual tactics like flanking cover. The militia, under leaders like Brooks, recognized and exploited that vulnerability brilliantly.
Yeah, that aha moment is really seeing how the narrow bridge was the linchpin. It created the opportunity. It wasn't just random chance. It was strategy meeting circumstance.
Right. And if you want to understand April 19th beyond just Lexington and Concord, looking closely at Meriam's Corner gives you that sharper focus.
Right.
You see the dynamics of the retreat evolving, the specific tactical challenges, the increasing effectiveness of the colonial response.
It adds a crucial layer to the story of that day.
Definitely.
So here's something to chew on, a final thought. How might the success at Meriam's Corner, however small, have affected colonial morale right then? Coming so soon after Lexington and Concord, did it boost their confidence, their determination?
That's a great question. And conversely, what message did it send to the British regulars? That this wasn't going to be an easy march back? That the countryside was rising against them in a way that was becoming increasingly dangerous?
Yeah, what did this clash at a simple farmhouse corner and a narrow bridge signal about the kind of brutal, grinding conflict that was just beginning? Makes you think about how these early moments really set the tone for everything that followed.